Hi guys, thank you for joining me again today. I know that pay is a big deal for many people, and so I'd like to give some insight into how my pay changed by moving from the UK to the US as a registered nurse. In order for me to get sponsorship um, for a green card by an employer that was recruiting internationally, I was required to have recent hospital experience. I had been working away from the bedside for a few years as a band 7 nurse in health visiting. And so I went back to the bedside and started working in ICU. And I had to go back down to a band 5 from a band 7. I didn't actually experience a pay loss by doing that because I was put at the top of band 5, which was the equivalent of the first few um, points of a band 7. So it's pitiful, but I was making about £16 per hour as a nurse in the UK. When I arrived in the US, um, I was making more than double that per hour immediately. And this is while the employer who was sponsoring my green card was actually making more than I was making per hour from my contract. And how I came about this information was I had gone for an annual review with the person who was my manager on the unit that I was contracted to work for about 2 years and 8 months. And she opened my file, and I don't think she realized what she was doing. I was able to see how much the agency was making per hour for me working there. So, from the hourly rate that they were charging the hospital, I was making slightly less than half of that, which when I first saw it, I was shocked. I was really shocked. I couldn't believe it. I thought maybe they were making something like $10 per hour from my contract, but they were making more than I was making per hour. I chose not to let that upset me because I looked at the bigger picture. I was aware of how difficult it is for many people dealing with fixing their immigration status. So, with my green card sponsorship, I arrived in the US as a permanent resident, and so did the rest of my family. So, that to me was invaluable. Just knowing that I never had to worry about my immigration status. It was paid for. Well, I was paying for it with that contract because for every dollar I made, they made the same and a little bit more. So I chose to say, okay, this is my dues for this green card. And I get to start a new life. I get to start something new for myself. So I did my contract and I finished it. And once I finished my contract, I was free to work wherever I wanted and for whoever I wanted. So the first thing I did was I became a travel nurse, and this was during the pandemic. So I got a very good contract and I made some very good money. Probably, I won't go into the figures because it is actually embarrassing how much money people were making during the pandemic. But those of you who did those contracts will know what I'm talking about. So I did one contract and I was ready to just settle down, get a permanent job, and get on with life. So after that first contract, I got my first full time job. And this gave me a really good indication of what I was worth on the job market. And this was now in a different state. I moved from the state that I arrived in, where my sponsor had placed me because that's where they had the work. And I moved to Texas. So I got my job offer, and the pay rate immediately for that job was 4 times what I had made in the UK, which was funny. And not only that, um, I was also offered a relocation bonus for moving from Arizona to Texas. And that was about, I think it was $15,000. And then I was offered a sign on bonus of $10,000. In addition to the pay, the hourly pay, the sign on bonus, the relocation bonus, there is an opportunity to earn an annual incentive based bonus as a nurse. This is something that I had never experienced. Having bonuses given to me as a nurse, it's something that I'd only heard of for people who worked in financial organizations or whatever, people who had the important jobs. All of a sudden, I was a person who was earning a bonus. So, as a nurse in some organizations here, you can earn a bonus, and it is based on how well your unit or how well the nurses do in keeping numbers down for nursing sensitive indicators, things like pressure ulcers, hospital acquired infections, falls, and that sort of thing. As long as those numbers remain below a certain percentage, all the nurses who work at the bedside are offered a bonus. And your bonus is based on how many years of experience you have. So I'm now a nurse with 20, almost 22 years now. So my bonus will be one of the bigger ones compared to people who perhaps have 1 or 2 years experience. And how that works is if there are more than a certain percentage of falls, the bonus starts to go down. So there's an incentive for nurses to make sure that patients are not falling or they're not acquiring hospital acquired infections. So it's always nice when those bonuses come because it's recognition for doing good work. There's also incentive-based bonuses, which come as a result of your annual review. So if you go to your annual review and you demonstrate that you've been doing your job and extra or whatever, there's also a bonus for that. Well, that's not a bonus as such. That's a pay increase. So yeah, that part is a pay. It's performance-based pay increase. So the incentive to work harder is always there as a nurse when you're here in the States. When I look back at how it was in the UK when I left, I don't think we'd had a pay increase in maybe 4 years, if not more. So the culture of being compensated adequately and more is one that is very appealing to me. And it's something that I use to sell the idea to other people of coming here. Um, so one thing that people did in the UK when I was there to make more money was they would work as agency nurses. And at one point, people had started to work as self-employed workers, as nurses. So they would essentially self-contract and get subcontracts from agencies and work as, I guess, what is a 1099 employee here in the States. But somehow the government found out and put an end to that. And so nurses couldn't make as much money as they'd been making. I'm not sure what the case is now. I'm sure nurses are still able to find ways to make more money in the UK than if you're working straight for the NHS. But here, I don't work as a travel nurse. I just have my employer, and that's adequate for me. My quality of life has improved because as an agency nurse in the UK, when I did do agency nursing, it wasn't that easy because one day I'd be at this hospital, the next day I'd be at that hospital. I'd be traveling all over the place. So that took time away from my children, took time away from a beautiful home that you have this beautiful home which you can't even enjoy because you're always at work. When I'm here, I live 15 minutes away from work. So I don't waste time traveling all over the place to get to and from work. I earn enough money that I don't have to be traveling all over the place in order to make enough money to earn a living. So when I compare the two in terms of the value that um, I receive just by being here as a nurse, obviously the US wins hands down. So that's it. There's the story about doubling my pay twice by moving from the UK to the US. Um, if you would like further clarification, I will give it if you need it. Um, One thing to note is that pay scales here differ based on where you are. So some states pay more than others, but that's related to cost of living. So the higher the cost of living, the more you earn. So if you Google California salaries for nurses, those nurses are making way more money than nurses anywhere else. But that's because California has a very high cost of living. Here in Texas, we don't earn as much as nurses in California, but our cost of living is not as expensive as it is in California. But you earn enough to live on in this area, so that's a blessing too. I know that many people get confused. I've had people call me from the UK and say, "Oh my God, do nurse anesthetists really make that amount of money?" Yes, they do. Nurse anesthetists make a lot of money. So do perinatal mental health nurses and other nurse practitioners in some specialities make good money too. But the thing to note with that is that they've had to go back to school and do an advanced degree and become board certified. So they are not just registered nurses, they are advanced practice nurses. And that's why they make as much as they make. They're in a position to, in some states, operate independently. In other states, they cannot be independent practitioners. They have to work under a physician. But who cares if you're making that amount of money and if you're doing something that you love? So there's the story about pay differences between the UK and the US. Thanks for watching.